Story 1. During a stressful period at work, I kept seeing an old woman in a blue dress standing in my kitchen. She would just stand there washing dishes that weren't there. I never felt threatened, but I couldn't explain why my mind conjured such a specific image. Story 2. A few years ago, I was running on almost no sleep during finals week, just a few hours over 2 days. I was lying on my couch trying to rest after an exam when I suddenly saw what looked like a shadowy figure walk from my kitchen to the hallway. It wasn't menacing, just a quick, solid movement. It was tall, human-shaped, and silent. I sat up thinking it was my roommate, but I was alone in the apartment. I checked everywhere, but there was nothing. The strange part was that the light in the hallway was off when I lay down, but it was on after the figure passed through. I chalked it up to extreme sleep deprivation, but it felt too real to be just that. Story 3. My brother and I were driving down a road we take frequently a few years ago. We both saw a praying mantis that appeared to be about 8 feet tall. It was very strange, considering there are only plain fields where we spotted it. Recently, I drove on that road again around the same time and saw it again, but I was alone that time. It was still very odd. Story 4. The tiniest puff sends you on a 15-minute journey into another dimension, where you see and interact with other beings. It reveals how tenuous our grasp on reality truly is. Story 5. A few years ago, I got lost while hiking in a remote area. I started to panic a bit when an older man in a red jacket appeared out of nowhere. He was very calm, pointed me in the right direction, and even made a joke that helped me feel better. I followed the path he indicated and eventually made it back. Later, I asked some park staff and other hikers if they had seen a man in a red jacket with a gray beard, but no one had. A couple even said I was the only person they had seen all day. I still have no idea who that man was. Maybe he was real, or perhaps I was just too tired and hallucinated. Either way, I'm grateful I made it back. Story 6. I worked in a warehouse pulling stock off wooden shelves. I reached down for a product from a lower shelf and saw a droplet hit the air and ripple outward like a rock tossed into a still pond. It was very unnerving. I've always heard about flashbacks from hallucinogenic substances. If there is such a thing, that was my one and only. Story 7. I watched a documentary about demonic possession. The people in the crowd actually flew towards the preacher while he was quoting from the Bible. I have seen this same documentary twice and have never seen that scene again, as if a higher power wanted me to see the truth about what was happening with those individuals. Felt so real, like watching a genuine movie. This is not a religious message. It is a description of a documentary that discusses the topic of hallucination. Story 8. I had a bad experience with some marijuana. The whole situation was confusing and chaotic. It felt like encountering art that combined surrealism and postmodernism. People tell me the marijuana must have been contaminated, but it was from a licensed dispensary. I don't think marijuana is supposed to have that effect, and I've never been able to explain why it happened to me. Story 9. I woke up when I was very young. In the dark corner, I saw a 6-foot-tall cat just sitting there, staring at me. Eventually, it faded away and was gone. I attribute it to still being half asleep. Story 10. I woke up in the night and felt my face. It was twice the size it normally was, big and round like the moon. I felt fine, but whenever I touched my cheeks, they were almost in line with my shoulders. I laughed lightly. This wasn't a brief moment. I lay there feeling my face for about 10 minutes, fascinated by the turn of events. In the morning, I no longer had a huge head. Story 11. I had 2 experiences that would fit the unexplainable type. The first occurred when my ex-wife and I moved into a new flat. On the first night, I woke up to a woman clearly calling out for my wife. This happened twice while I was fully awake, but it never happened again. The second experience was during my time at university when I might have had a breakdown. I didn't show up for a couple of days and my friends started to call me, but my phone died. I don't remember much except that I was sleeping a lot, and my cat was with me. I felt her fur under my fingers and the vibrations of her purring. She was purring so loudly, even though she had been dead for years. Felt so real. When I finally came to my senses, A friend rang the doorbell repeatedly, and I realized my cat hadn't been there at all, which crushed me, to be honest. Being connected with her for those few days, even while I was in a kind of psychosis, kept me going. I talked to her about how I got her, how much I loved her, how I chose her name, and what an annoying creature she was most of the time. Yet I would have moved mountains to save her. Remembering this is tougher than I thought. Story 12. A housefly the size of my hand is just resting on the ground, moving around and rubbing its legs together. Story 13. You will never convince me that I didn't used to see glowing orbs floating around the house when I was a little kid. They were about half a meter in diameter. They would just float around, lighting up the house. I would follow them. Sometimes they would float into the television or out the window and disappear, and I would run back to my room because it was dark. My family remembers me walking around the house at night, but nobody believes it was following glowing orbs. But they exist, I swear. Story 14. I woke up in the middle of the night sweating, and there was a red laser grid pattern projected all over my room and ceiling. I kept rubbing my eyes, and it wouldn't go away. I still have no idea what that was. Story 15. It's not unusual, but I keep seeing small bugs or spiders out of the corner of my eye. When I turn my head to look, nothing is there. Sometimes I also hear my phone go off, and when I check it, I have no notifications. Story 16. During my senior year of high school, I attended the Bonnaroo Music Festival. I lost second gear in my transmission while arriving, so I decided to leave the festival early because I couldn't go faster than 35 miles per hour. I was completely sober, but very sleep-deprived after spending a few days at the festival. On the drive home, I kept seeing lines of glowing red pigs running back and forth across the road. I even became convinced that I drove into the entrance of the festival several times. The next thing I knew, my friend's wife, who was following me home, honked her horn and asked me to roll down my window. She informed me that she was going on to her exit while I pulled off onto mine. I remember nothing about the drive, which took 3 to 4 hours, except for the vivid images of the red glowing pigs. Story 17. I had a difficult experience during my high school years. Our edible was laced, and we were unaware of it. It was the strangest thing I have ever witnessed. I saw my friend's face melt away like candle wax and had a conversation with her skull. Story 18. I swear I saw a cat run across my living room floor. I'm pretty sure a cat managed to get in and out of my house somehow, but I never figured out how it got in or found any other evidence that it was there. Story 19. When I was little, my parents and I would see people walking through our house. We heard voices that sounded like people talking on the phone in another room. My mom heard music playing all the time. I never heard the music, but I always heard the voices. Story 20. One time when I used a hallucinogenic substance, I experienced severe time dilation. It is difficult to explain, but my entire evening unfolded out of order, as if my connection with spacetime was temporarily disrupted. Story 21. This might not be what you were looking for, but I experienced a waking dream hallucination from my epilepsy medication once. The dream wasn't particularly interesting. I was just standing around smoking a cigarette while waiting for someone. I remember that I was doing laundry when it happened, and I managed to finish that, but it took an immense amount of concentration and internal narration. I had to actively think about every single action I was taking to avoid losing myself in the hallucination. This was strange because all the concentration caused Dream Me to forget to smoke the cigarette, which burned down to the filter. This made Dream Me begin to suspect that something was wrong and prompted him to investigate what had caused him to stand there for so long. It was also his last cigarette, so he was somewhat frustrated. So, imagine actively narrating every movement and moment of your life inside your head while simultaneously narrating another version of yourself that isn't real, trying to figure out what the real version of you is doing. You can see both things happening at the same time. It's not like there are two separate images. It's more like watching two different shows layered on top of each other. Additionally, I dream in the third person, so the hallucination was also perceived in the third person. I don't know if that made it easier or harder, but it definitely added to the disorientation. Story 22. When I was a young boy, I saw a black bat-like creature crawl through the window while I was in bed and fly over to me. I was paralyzed and could not move. It flew towards my neck, and the moment it touched me, I startled and was able to move again. The creature was gone. My mother was sleeping in the room as well. I went back to sleep and thought about it the next day, deciding it must have been a dream. However, it seemed off. I couldn't make sense of how I had been dreaming, that I was awake in bed and then woke up to the same room without any break in consciousness. 20 years later, I was a burgeoning alcoholic and staying in my friend's basement. One night, I was lying flat on my back, ready to fall asleep, when the bedroom door opened. In came three beings that looked somewhat like black plastic snowmen, three round balls stacked on top of each other, with the middle ball being the largest. They were about 5 feet tall. They didn't seem to have faces, but they did have three long, spindly, tentacle arms that ended in 3 or 4 flared fingers. Out of the flared cones of the fingers were different colors: red, yellow, blue, green. As they entered the room, their arms and fingers were twirling, and the whole room was lit like a disco ball. They walked on either side of my bed, and I realized I could not move or speak. The next thing I knew, I was falling onto the bed from about a foot in the air, and the creatures were gone. I must have done a full body flop like a fish out of water. Just like the incident with the bat, there was no lapse in consciousness. At no point did I feel asleep. I spent the next morning feeling that I had been abducted by aliens, and I felt I couldn't tell anyone or they would think I was crazy. I finally got the nerve to talk to my friend's wife about it, and she suggested it was sleep paralysis. This explanation seemed to fit and helped make sense of my bad experience. A few months later, I stayed at my sister's place. I was lying on a futon in her living room and saw a pure black shadow in the shape of a man slowly walk out from the hallway, through the kitchen, and reach his hands down to my face. I knew what was happening this time and was not surprised that I could not move. This was during a period of especially heavy drinking. A few years later, I began getting sober cold turkey after about 4 years of heavy drinking, blacking out every night. I was lying in bed experiencing withdrawals. Sweaty, aching, sick, hot, cold, feeling odd electrical shocks, and extreme anxiety and despair. I knew I was going to be visited by a sleep paralysis demon. I felt its presence in the apartment and was waiting for the black shadow man to walk into my bedroom. Instead, I closed my eyes and felt a face approaching me in the darkness, getting closer and closer. It was round, fanged, pale, and had an evil look in its eyes. It was angry and not a human face. I had an intense seizure and survived. I have been sober for almost 3 years now, and I am not entirely convinced it was all just sleep paralysis. The only way I can continue living is by having some kind of faith that we are more than just machines made of flesh and that we do not live in a cold, dead, material universe where we merely die and that's it. This perspective opens me up to a lot of unconventional thoughts about alien demons and entities. But who knows? It was probably just sleep paralysis. Story 23. I saw some pieces of a Keurig coffee machine fly off the counter in my office and land several feet away with no one nearby. Story 24. When I am in a noisy environment, I might mistakenly hear the ringtone of my phone. When I looked at it, my phone didn't ring at all, and it didn't send a notification showing my missed call. This has been bothering me to this day. Story 25. The fact that I was hallucinating at all wasn't too unexplainable. I spent a few months experiencing hypnopompia, which are hallucinations upon waking up. Usually, they were simple things like thinking I saw my cat next to my bed or hearing my roommate calling for me when they weren't. Some of it was technically sleep paralysis in that I couldn't make my body react to it, but it wasn't the terrifying kind, just a bit frustrating and disorienting. Anyway, the subject of one of these hallucinations was weird and hard to explain. I woke up one morning to see a full astronaut standing next to my bed and looking down at me, reflective helmet and all. The adrenaline surge broke me out of the paralysis, and when I sat up, it was gone. That also ended the hypnopompia, and I haven't experienced it since. Story 26. I can't say it's the weirdest experience, as they happen often, but one of my sleep paralysis episodes involves seeing people standing above me while I'm in a locked half-asleep, half-awake state. I then scream at the top of my lungs around 4 a.m., which causes my husband to jolt awake. Unfortunately, this happens at least once every few months. My mom has the same experience. Story 27. For a brief period during a stressful time in my life, I kept seeing the silhouette of a man out of the corner of my eye. I occasionally saw small bugs crawling on me and kept hearing a child's laughter. This mostly happened when I was home alone, which was not creepy at all. Story 28. After my husband died, I decided to go for a walk. It was as if I was seeing everything in an intensely heightened state. Colors were brighter, and I could see and hear the blades of grass moving. The birds sounded like distinct songs. I could see bugs flying around in detail as if under a magnifying glass. Later that day, I had to buy Planet Earth on DVD, and I watched it nonstop for 24 hours. I questioned the significance of my existence. Story 29. No joke, I saw a zipper-like object appear in the air about 10 feet from me. It unzipped to a white void and lasted only a few seconds before fading away, similar to an eye floater. It was very strange, and the odd thing was that it became completely silent when it appeared. There were no bugs, birds, or any noises at all. Story 30. I have a condition called schizophrenia with affective features. While I experience voices in my head, I understand that those voices are hallucinations. It is a surreal situation to hear someone talk who isn't there, knowing that they are not present, yet still being able to hear every single syllable just the same. Story 31. The colors red, blue, and green are all real. The color yellow is a mystical experience shared by everyone. Story 32. I was well over 24 hours without sleep and had just finished a round of architecture finals. Not surprisingly, I was taking Adderall at this point in my life. Going a day or two without sleep wasn't abnormal, and I had my fair share of stimulant-induced hallucinations. The most realistic occurrence was one time when I thought I heard a rodent in my garbage can. I was standing on a chair panicking when my boyfriend came home to find me poking it with my drafting ruler. Squealing. I still remember feeling it kicking around. No mouse, just a little scholastic chaos. Story 33. When I was 8 and the sickest I had ever been in my life, I looked at my mother and asked why there were so many popsicles dancing around her, and if I could have one. Turns out I am allergic to sulfa drugs. For years after my father passed away, I swear I would see him just turning a corner. Took a while for me to shake that. Story 34. We were on standby during basic training. I hadn't slept the night before our field training exercise because I got caught sleeping in an empty bunk, and I imagined that forest creatures and fairies were setting up a grand feast for me right in front of my rifle. Story 35. When I was a kid, I woke up and saw a fisherman, like a New England lobster fisherman, wearing yellow rain gear, standing in the doorway looking into my room. Then he just faded away. Story 36. When I was about 7, I wasn't feeling well and crawled into bed with my parents. I was wide awake and saw a 6-foot-tall alligator wearing a trench coat and fedora, walking down the hall like a person. Story 37. In reality, who is the actual president? Reality is and always will be the correct answer. If you think that's wrong, give it time. You have not seen anything yet. Story 38. Not the weirdest, but maybe the most comforting. I was a bit sleep-deprived and clearly heard in my ear, "Hide the vodka." At that time, I had no idea what it was referring to. A couple of days later, an acquaintance offered me a bottle of vodka. I was startled but told myself it was just a coincidence. I decided to drink it out of pure self-sabotage and reckless energy, and terrible things occurred. I nearly died from a potentially life-threatening concussion. I fell on my face, which saved me, but I could have really left this earth then and there. Story 39. I could see electricity hit the 4-way purple window pane and some crank. While walking in my neighborhood, the sidewalk turned into liquid and was flowing like a stream. I looked at the overhead power lines and saw the blue-green electricity flowing through the cables. Story 40. All my hallucinations are easily explained by the use of LSD or lack of sleep. However, after being awake for over 90 hours, I would see small animals scurry around the baseboards in the shadows. Story 41. Seeing corners of tall buildings curl like a thin piece of paper, hearing birds chirp inside my apartment, and the smell of burning hair overwhelmed me. I was extremely stressed about work at the time. Story 42. I don't know if it counts, but I was in my room and wanted to close the door. Somehow my closet moved, and I wasn't able to close the door anymore. I stood there for 30 minutes figuring out if I was going crazy or not. P.S. It was really in the way. To this day, I have no idea how that happened. Story 43. When I was very little, maybe around 6 years old, I was on the kitchen floor playing. I was on all fours and turned to look behind me. I swear I saw a fish swimming towards me in the air at a 3/4 angle in an up and down wavy pattern. It looked like a cartoon fish with big white eyes featuring a single black pupil, a yellow body, red fins and tail, and possibly a seafoam green color elsewhere on its body. I was stunned by it, blinked my eyes, and then it was gone. Story 44. When I was 5, I used to sleep in our king bed with my mom and sister. One day, I woke up, rolled over, and saw that my sister looked like a giant sausage with a horrified face looking back at me. I was so freaked out and have never forgotten about it. Story 45. A ghostly experience. I went to the restroom and had an unfortunate encounter. I felt it, smelled it, and dealt with it. But when I looked, it was simply gone. Story 46. One late night when I was about 13 during Christmas time, I was relaxing in my room at 6 a.m., pulling an all-nighter, when I heard bells jingling clearly, as if Santa Claus was in my living room. I was past the age of believing in Santa, and I didn't check because it was quite terrifying. Story 47. I haven't slept for 5 days at this point due to insomnia, and I was at work at my daycare. I was kneeling on the floor, tying a child's shoe when, all of a sudden, I saw a huge black shadow leap up and charge toward us. I immediately jumped to my feet and grabbed the child just as the shadow reached us. Since there was no way to escape, I turned and covered the child with my body, using an arm to shield her head. I didn't know what it was, but it would have to go through me first. A coworker saw and told me there was nothing there. I swear to this day, 13 years later, that I saw what I saw. Story 48. I thought I saw my cat's tail while he was walking next to my chair. Then I turned in my chair, and he wasn't there. I was looking directly at it. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.